If you'll all join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag
Oh, there you go.
of the United States.
I'll start over. I'm sorry. I'll pledge allegiance to the flag
The flag
of the United States of America and
to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I just want to make one announcement, and that is that Chair Bernard, I think most of you may not know, but he has, we have switched roles here, so to speak, and I am now the co-chair on behalf of the County Commission, and Commissioner Schrader will be filling my shoes. So I don't know if she'll make it today, but she'll be filling the second commissioner seat on the commission. So with that, I believe Trent, our presenter tonight is our presentation is based on the transit study.
Actually, we do have a couple. This might help a little bit. Let me put up the packet for us here. So we have a couple of housekeeping items to tick through first, starting with with the minutes.
Okay, is there any amendments or changes to the minutes? If not, is there anyone who wishes to make a motion to approve the minutes?
I'll move to approve them.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, I think it was moved by Mayor Axelrod, it's seconded by Commissioner Gornick. So all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? The minutes are approved. Thank you. I mentioned the notice of change in the county positions at C4, and I guess the question here is tonight, I see Trent, the January meeting, do we want to convene one or not? So why don't you take that, Trent?
Yeah, so I would just kind of note that typically we cancel the January meeting because of its proximity to the new year, and usually everyone's traveling. However, we're so close to our computers these days that might not be quite the same issue, and our January meeting, I don't think, is right next to New Year for 21. However, we do have a pretty substantial changeover with our city membership, and I think it would be challenging to actually even have a quorum for a January meeting. So it would, up to this group, we can do whatever. I'm working that day, so happy to facilitate. But if given that we want to have like an informational meeting or something along the lines, we can certainly host it, but it would be my recommendation to keep the new year alive, start 21 with a little bit of rest, and sort of reconvene in February with sort of a full set.
Trent, do you want to discuss a little bit about the changes on the people that are serving on C4 and how that might be a little bit different or awkward until the councils approve or nominate their people for those who are not just transferring over to the new year?
Absolutely, happy to do that. So as you know, here in Clackamas County, we have had a significant changeover from the election, and that will show up here in Clackamas, here at C4, not the least of all with some of our mayors who are attending tonight. So we were going to spend a little bit of time here later in the meeting to recognize our outgoing members, but this certainly is part of that. We'll lose Mayor Axelrod, we'll lose Mayor Knapp, we'll lose Councilor Kohlhoff. Chair Bernard, of course, is moving on as well. Councilor Morrison, just looking around the room here. And we do have a few alternates in some of those places, but not in every location. So it would just be it would be challenging to host the new meeting, and typically not every. I think it's usually the week before most people swear in after the election. So certainly happy to come up with some agenda topics for you, but that would be the impact of the meeting, is it would be a challenging attendance night for the C4.
So what's the pleasure of the group? Would you like to meet? Happy to take any input from our members.
What topics do you anticipate, Trent, would be addressing in February if we forego a January meeting?
Thank you for bringing that up. And we were going to have that conversation at the upcoming executive meeting as well. So the topics that are currently popping up is the climate action plan that the county is moving through. There is a desire to engage our city elected officials on that, as well as other members of our community. So that is a very likely topic for February. The supportive housing services issue is also on the rise. And so they are building that process right now as we speak, and sort of how that money will start to flow out of Metro into the county and then into the services. So our staff really wants to get in front of elected officials who are asking a lot of questions about it. And we want to make sure folks have a chance to engage and just be upfront, transparent, informative. And since housing is part of C4, that is a great venue, we think, to bring that in. So that's what February and maybe even March potentially looks like. And just a reminder that March is normally our first meeting of the C4 year, where also like some of our executive elected official executive seats happen, some of that discussion. So that's what we can expect so far in the new year. In addition to whatever comes out of this transportation conversation or this transit conversation, don't forget that the legislative session potentially begins the day after MLK, unless they throw us all for a loop and 2021 is just like 2020. Fingers crossed that's not true. So those are some topics on the horizon.
Councilor Morrison.
Yeah, Tualatin won't appoint a replacement for me until January 11th, which is the first council meeting of the year. So we would have no one representing if there was a meeting in January.
Thank you for that. So Trent, it struck me that there might be some math here as far as a quorum. Is there a mathematical reason where we may not even have a quorum?
It's very possible. I mean, right now I don't anticipate a voting need that could happen in January, unless there's some legislative issue that would come to C4 that we can maybe talk about tonight and wouldn't lose out on if we talked about it in February. So yes, I mean, I think that is an issue. Could potentially have a quorum problem in January. This group also meets for the purpose of coordination, which is not necessarily a voting topic either. So it's just for the purpose of it. It's next to the holidays and there could be a quorum issue. So it's good to talk about it. That's why we bring it up.
Councilor Heisey.
I'm available. I'm continuing on, but I'm not hearing a huge amount of enthusiasm for meeting in January, and I'm hearing a number of reasons that it could be problematic for a number of cities. So why don't we skip it? I know that we will have plenty to talk about in February, whether or not we meet in January. So and with a number of changes at the county level as well, I can see how it might be challenging to meet in January from that side too. So why don't we forego it per the usual and see everyone and all the new faces in February.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Smith, or Commissioner Smith.
Okay, thank you. I would agree with Commissioner Heisey. I was thinking along those same lines already. I will be continuing on representing Oregon City, so I will be here and can attend on the 7th. But if it looks like we're going to be missing half of our folks, we don't have any pressing items, I'm not sure why we would, trend. I would look to trends, like, do we have things that we absolutely need to cover, yes or no? If not, it doesn't sound like it, then I say we just, make it easy on ourselves, take a breather, let everybody reset in January and come back in February.
Yes, please give yourself some time is my recommendation. There is no pressing item for January.
Okay, well, thank you, Commissioner. Anyone interested in meeting? And if I don't see any hands go up, we'll just defer and we'll meet in February. One thing while we're on this topic, I would just either ask, is anyone from the cities have any idea who, or are we conveying to your colleagues on the councils, on the city councils, that there'll be action in January to get someone appointed for February? I mean, has everyone got their councils up to speed? I'm just kind of curious. I just want to plant the seed that that it's on the forefront of everyone's mind, so that in February we can start kicking off and doing business. Mayor Knapp, I see you nodding your head as a yes.
We will appoint, I'm not sure whether it'll be our first January meeting or second January meeting, but we definitely will have someone appointed. I'm hopeful it might be my replacement mayor, but we'll have to see how schedules match up, and we'll get that figured out in January.
Okay. And the last thing on this, and we won't belabor it, but I don't know what the alternate roles are, if some of the alternates are rolling over in the absence of that, and if that's effective. But hopefully, again, maybe Trent, we can make sure that emails go out and let everyone know that the February meeting will require, ideally, no one's forced to be here, but we'd really like to have as much attendance across the board as possible. So with that, I think we covered that. Any other comments before we move on? Great. Seeing none, that brings us to the Clackamas Transit Development Plan update. I've been really excited about this. I've been waiting a long time. So with that, we have our presenter, Karen Burig, who's our Clackamas Long Range Planning Manager. So Karen, you want to take it away?
Certainly. First, I wanted to thank you all for inviting me to be here tonight. I'm also here with Krista Purser from Kittleson and Associates, as well as Susie Wright. I think her name might say Karen Burig, but there is not two of me. But all three of us are going to be participating in the presentation tonight and have been working on this plan. So Krista, next slide. So first, I wanted to make sure we're all kind of grounded in what the transit development plan is. I know that we came to the C4 meeting back in June to be able to talk about the transit development plan that was going to be underway. And we're here now close to the end of the process, kind of bringing to you what we've learned throughout this process. But first of all, really the focus and the reason why we undertook the transit development plan was to guide the investments in Clackamas County and to guide the investments under House Bill 2017, the STIF program. It was a relatively new source of funding, and it's collected from all employees that work in the county. And so even if you do not live in a transit district, you are still paying this employee tax. So it provided this new opportunity for us to fund projects that would allow connections between our transit districts. So Clackamas County, as you may know, is really unique, and not just in the region, but throughout the state. We have, I believe it is 7 different transit providers. And so this particular plan had 2 specific focus areas. One is the area within the TriMet service district and allowing us the ability to kind of be more informed about transit service within that area and to be able to provide input into future STIF plans within the TriMet area. But the other focus of our plan was to really look at those kind of connections between our existing transit districts and places where there's no transit at all. So next slide. So I do want to touch a little bit on the HB 2017 transit funds. I know that last month that Christina Babcock provided a presentation. I think she said it ended up being a little bit shorter, but again, it's kind of key to the transit development plan and why we're doing it. These are funds that became available, and in order to use them, you really need to connect the funds to projects within a plan. And so the type of projects that you can fund with this are basically service enhancements, things that improve service, as well as different types of planning efforts. There's the priorities of the HB 2017 money really focus on improving public transit for low-income households, looking at low and no emission buses, improving connections between communities, as well as reducing fragmentation. So, and then there's the final point that it talks about is projects must be identified in a local planning process. So just recently, we're kind of actually at the tail end of the second round of the STIF planning project. They had the first round back 2 years ago, where there was a series of projects that were identified and then funded. And then just recently, they are putting together the plans for the 23-24 funding year. So next slide. So again, Clackamas County is unique. We have Canby Area Transit, the shuttle that's provided by the community college, Mount Hood Express, Sandy Area Metro, South Clackamas Transit District, as well as SMART and TriMet, all providing services within Clackamas County. There's already a wealth of bus service, and there's different types. You can, there are shuttles within our county, light rail within our county. We have services that, and supporting infrastructure such as park and ride. So we really have a really solid foundation that we're starting from, but how can we make sure that that service is available to all different parts of our county, and that we're able to look into the future and understand how we can really improve our service. So next slide. So this is kind of hard to see, but the intent here is really to show the extent of Clackamas County. I think the colors don't pop as well, but this really is Sandy. Sandy provides service. The TriMet district extends all the way out to Estacada. South Clackamas Transportation District is serves the area around Malala. SMART serves Wilsonville. And our transit districts already connect to each other. Sandy provides service into the TriMet district. The South Clackamas district provides both connections up to the TriMet area in Oregon City, as well as into Canby. And then Wilsonville connects into Canby. So we have this foundation, but there's a lot of different ways that we can improve. So next slide. So back in June, we shared with you what we anticipated the transit development would be. We wanted to make sure that it had a vision of what the transit service in Clackamas County would be like, include goals and policies, undertake a level of service analysis, identify future service opportunities, and prioritize those transit needs. So part of that is measuring, creating measures to ensure that there's transit access for future developments, and then ultimately looking at, will there be a monitoring program to make sure that we can keep this on track? And then finally, just being able to touch base a little bit on land use strategies. What are those things that we need to do to support transit in all of our communities? So next slide. So here we are as a part of the project. We've actually done quite a bit of work already. I know that we actually have done different engagement, and we went out to different communities. We went to the city councils both in Tualatin and West Lynn, and we did a variety of other different types of engagement. So we did do a needs analysis, which was focused in the spring. Over the summer, we took advantage of really doing the heart of our outreach and looking at different future service opportunities. And then just here in the fall, we put together the Future Solutions memo, and that memo was included in your packet, and it's going to be the focus of our presentation tonight. And coming out of this work is we're taking all of that information that we've learned, and we'll put it together within a transit development plan. And then we wrap everything up just into the early 2021. Next slide. So tonight, I'm going to now pass the baton over to our consulting team. They're going to talk about the Future Solutions memo and really highlight kind of the near, mid, and long-term projects that kind of rose to the top during this process.
Great. Thank you, Karen. I'm going to start us off. This is Susie Wright with Kittleson, and then I'll be passing it off to Krista Purser. So I'm going to touch a little bit on some of the steps that Karen just mentioned, kind of how we developed some of the needs and started to define them, and then what some of the public outreach that we did to help us further understand some of those needs and prioritize them. So as part of identifying some of the needs and how to come up with different, what strategies might be best for each of those needs, we looked at a variety of transit corridors, existing and potential, as well as not just corridors, but also kind of areas. And we were looking at travel demand on regional corridors. We were looking at commute demand, so more of the work trip demand on those regional corridors. We're also in different areas looking at population and employment densities. And as I mentioned, we were also trying to inform that analysis on potential need with information from the public, which I'll talk a little bit about. Next slide, please. But ultimately, with that analysis of different corridors and areas and their needs and the public input, we were able to take those needs and start to define them into 3 general types of service enhancements, in addition to some of the other recommendations in the plan. But the service enhancements are really divided into 3 general categories. So one being new regional connections, the second being new local service, and the third being just enhanced service, higher levels of service in areas that already have service. And so you can see for each of those 3 types of service enhancements, we were trying to identify if these were currently outside any of the districts Karen just mentioned that operate within Clackamas County, that's identified with it NA, whether it was in TriMet service area or potential future TriMet service area, or whether it was in one of the other service providers areas. Next slide, please. So these different corridors and areas that we looked at as far as travel demand, commute travel demand, densities, and kind of what the what a reasonable amount of service might be warranted based on those demands and densities. We looked at those by kind of each of these corridors that you can see on the map, and the areas identified with some of the red circles. The green lines really represent kind of what the general demand for transit is on that corridor, and it's basically currently being served. And the red areas are corridors and areas that we identified to be kind of underserved or warranting some additional additional service. And Krista is going to be talking a little bit more about what the actual recommendation is for each of these areas and whether it fit into an assessment of near-term, kind of mid-term or long-term needs. And partially of those near-term, mid-term, and long-term projects were really also kind of split up in partially in recognition of available funding. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk a little bit of the outreach findings, information that we collected on each of these corridors and areas that really helped inform the projects that I mentioned. Krista will talk to you more about. So we had targeted meetings with many of the CPOs, as well as outreach to specific community groups, as well as an online survey, which I'm going to talk more about the feedback we collected from the online survey. Before I do that, here's just a list of some of the CPOs and Hamlet meetings that we attended. This allowed us to talk to them kind of about the different things that we were looking at within their specific areas, as also help to promote the online survey and encourage all these groups to help share the survey with their email lists and outreach mechanisms as well. So the online survey did run for nearly a month. In addition to helping promote it through those meetings, it was also emailed directly to about 50 community organizations and neighborhood associations and posted on not only the some of the county's social media, as well as other sources like Nextdoor. And ultimately, we had 350 participants in this survey. So for each of those lines and dots on the map, they were lettered, and I believe it went up to at least L. So we had, a very sizable number of different areas to ask people to weigh in on, and they could dive straight into 3 geographic areas to be able to figure out what they were most interested in giving feedback on, whether it was in the West Trimet area, the East Trimet area, or in Southeast Clackamas County. And within each of those areas, they were then also able to answer questions about any one of the lines or dots that we had on the needs map. And so what we then asked them for each one of those potential projects and needs was we asked them, if there were service here, how likely would they be to use it? If we had potential multiple different route options to fill that need, whether they had a preference. Next slide, please. And we also asked them about, what time would they be most interested in riding a bus that served that route, so that we could try to see if there was any key differences in demand amongst the different areas that we were inquiring about, to see if they had differences in early morning or late evening or weekend service needs. So from that, we got very specific information for every one of those areas that really helped inform kind of a selection of a preferred alignment if it was appropriate at this time. Some of them won't get finalized until we get closer to implementing something, but we got good feedback on each of the routes, what its general kind of key demand times might be, and which was also useful in helping us to prioritize those. We also collected feedback about what was most important to people, whether it was having new services or enhancing existing services versus doing some of the other things that really help transit service connect and work better for people, such as providing more information and tools about how to ride versus improving bus stop amenities or bike and pedestrian connections, or whether kind of changes in fare payment options would be, most helpful. So what was most helpful to them? Is it having more service versus making better connectivity, walking or biking, or with information about how to ride and so forth? And so what we did see was a very high interest in additional service, as you can see in the upper left and the upper middle, but still good support and identification of need for some of the other types of enhancements. I think making sure we have good information and tools available about routes and schedules and how to ride clearly is very important, and something that stood up. I think stood out as far as one of the other key takeaways from this planning process is finding ways to make it a little bit easier for folks to navigate the 7 different providers and understand, how do they connect and help them get to where they're going. Next slide, please. So I think with that, I'm going to turn it over to Krista, and she'll talk a little bit more specifically about the projects that are now in the plan to kind of fill those needs based on the input we heard, and how we have prioritized them.
Great, thank you, Susie. So as Susie said, I'm going to jump into our service opportunities. So we did have those corridors and areas that we knew there was some interest or demand for more transit service. So this process was taking us through and trying to figure out what type of service is that going to be? Is it something more like the traditional TriMet service? It's a fixed route bus. It has a schedule and stops. Is it something that's a little more demand response? Is it going curb to curb, making trips upon request? What makes sense based on all those different factors? There were also some areas where we may have had multiple types of transit service recommended too. So just because one of them had higher interest didn't mean we didn't recommend multiple options for that area. So I'm going to walk through and probably jump to maps. So we'll zoom in and a little further, starting from the big county view and then down into the metro area extents throughout this process. And then in the short-term recommendations, we had a few corridors that were looking for something, closer to 20, 30, 40 or more trips per day. So if you think about a bus that runs every 30 minutes, it might be having somewhere near 25 or 30 trips a day. So what came out of this were a few really highly traveled corridors or ones that didn't have any service. So some of those being Highway 43, increasing the frequency of existing service that's out there, new service between Oregon City and the I-5 interchange or Tualatin, some service in East Tualatin, and then some east-west from Jennings, well, from Oregon City to Jennings Lodge and Happy Valley in the Milwaukee industrial area. So some of these areas had been identified in other plans or were in the process of being implemented by different providers. So we have some detail in the memo about who is providing that service or what it might look like. So for example, that I-205 service, that's actually one of the shuttles being examined. Christina Babcock may have mentioned it the previous time, but we are looking at a shuttle service between Oregon City, Westland, and Tualatin, and what that might look like. At the same time, SMART is looking at a service between Wilsonville and Clackamas Town Center, which would also serve that corridor. So again, there's some of these that have a few different options. We also, at the beginning of this process, highlighted the Oregon City and Clackamas industrial area shuttles as a high need. That those are in the process of being implemented, estimating in 2021. So those aren't in the table and aren't out there today, but will be shortly. So again, at that high level view, not a lot of regional connections in the short term. There are some gaps across the different cities in the county, but these were the higher demand ones were focused a little bit closer to the metro area. I'm going to zoom in here. Again, those two new shuttles, Oregon City and Clackamas industrial area, that will be here shortly. Also recommending Milwaukee, that I-205 connection. So this is showing not only the existing services that are out there today, but if we did recommend an increase, then something like Highway 43 is a little darker and thicker, showing more service than it has currently. I'll zoom in a tiny bit more so you can see that. There's that Jennings Lodge, the Oregon City service. It's in TriMet's short range plan as well. Really looking to provide these connections in areas that have pretty big gaps in service today, especially east-west throughout Clackamas County. And move into the midterm. So we did make a lot of recommendations for the short term. Not all of those would reach their ultimate service levels just as they're implemented. So you might start something a little slower, build the demand for it, gauge whether it's addressing riders' needs. And then in the future, we would be kind of these first two, MT1 and 2, evaluating how that service is doing and figuring out how we can increase. Maybe we need more weekend service or higher frequency. So those first two are ones that we recommended in short term. And then we are doing a lot of adding service here. There's regions of the county that do currently have services, but we're seeing a lot of commuters between them. Maybe we're seeing higher densities in the future. So some of these regions might not be as high density today, but we're expecting a lot of growth in them. I'll switch over. There's a few more on this page. And again, we commented on adding service to Canby, but Canby Area Transit would be doing the planning for what that service would look like. So we do reference other transit plans in here. I'll jump into the map so I just find those a little easier to see. At the regional level, we're getting a little more connection between Estacada and Eagle Creek, that MT12. And I'll zoom in as those are pretty dense in here. So we're doing things like adding service to, or adding frequency to the shuttles that had been implemented in the shorter term. There's a few more new connections in here, up in the Oak Grove area with MT8, up in Happy Valley, MT6, going out to 12 MT9, we did hear a lot of interest in travel between Sandy and Clackamas Town Center, as well as some other increased service within some of the transit districts or on some of the highways over here as well. One more smaller zoom in, just if you're curious where these are flowing. So these are longer term or midterm recommendations. The exact routing may not be, is not set for a lot of the recommendations further than the short term, but trying to understand what areas and what connections do we need to make, where might they go, and ultimately how can we support current development and future development to make that future transit successful. I have one more section here into our long term. So again, a lot of those services that we started to implement in the short and medium term, we're looking at evaluating those services over time, increasing and adding service if there's the interest and demand for it. And there's a few more new services, things like adding service between Molalla and Woodburn on the C2C corridor. Again, a longer range one as a lot of the area is still developing. And even going south of Molalla down into Woodburn is a high interest for a lot of folks between those communities. There were some areas we didn't see a lot of demand for, but of course things can change over time. So do you want to continue monitoring for increases in transit demand to those different corridors or communities? So this longer term map is expanding some of those regional connections, especially out of Molalla, increasing service on 212. When we think back to the map Karen showed of the existing services, there's a lot more, a lot fewer gaps and a lot more of a kind of a grid network of transit in the region. Zoom in further there. One of those areas that we saw more north-south connections was I-205 here, which we are serving both on I-205 with that new Wilsonville and some local service. More connections on 99. That C2C connection is out here, as well as increased frequency elsewhere. One more zoom in there. I believe most of these are increases to service and not any new routes. I'm happy to jump back to any of those if folks have questions, but on that note of thinking about where we might want future transit service, we also outlined the different strategies and improvements that we can make so that we can make those services successful. So looking at things like where we need improvements to transit centers and bus stops. Improvements to bus stops was pretty high on a lot of people's interest list. It's that comfortable spot that you're at before and after your transit service. So considering things like pedestrian access for people walking and biking over to bus stops, lighting at bus stops for safety, thinking about how much capacity we need. We heard that Oregon City Transit Center is pretty full right now. So if there's a need to expand those major transit centers and transfer centers. Bus stops, thinking about shelters, thinking about benches, especially if there's people who, if we're near higher populations of elderly or people with disabilities, thinking about what makes that comfortable for them. Again, bicycle and pedestrian facilities. If someone's trying to get to a stop across a highway, we hear a lot of that. 82nd Avenue has come up in some conversations, the need to cross facilities to get to transit stops. Where are those areas we should be encouraging improvements to or more sidewalk coverage to? Other considerations, land use and code strategies. We did look at the planned densities throughout the metro area and beyond. But where were there areas where we have existing service that may not be as dense? How can we encourage that to grow in an area that's already being served? What type of agency coordination needs are there? the county working with cities when they're looking at implementing services, working with ODOT on some of the highways, and especially getting bicycle and pedestrian improvements near rural highways can be, that came up a few times from folks as well. Development standards when you do have a new development where you're putting a bus stop that might encourage transit ridership. How are they accessing the stop? Maybe you have a park and ride or a bike and ride. What type of land use do we need? Then information and technology, those tools that people are using. So whether it's you're using Google Maps for your trip planning and you're able to see your real-time vehicle arrival information. Is the bus running late? Do I have more time or did I miss it? Fare payment options, that was a pretty big one across the different providers. The county is currently working with those providers on a fare study right now, but yeah, people don't think about which transit providers they're on. They just want to get from point A to point B, and how do we make that easier with those technologies. I think that's the end of my presentation. I can either turn it back over to Karen or take any questions.
Yeah, I think I just wanted to say a couple more things and then we'll be open for questions. So the next steps are really to take all of this information and put it into the draft of the Transit Development Plan, which we'll be reviewing with our Technical Advisory Committee and our Project Advisory Committee. And then moving that forward to the Clackamas County Planning Commission, as well as the Board of County Commissioners, which we both think will happen we're hoping for early 2021 for both of those things. You know, this process has really been, I think, a very positive process. We've really worked in partnership with all of the different providers in the area. They each had a representative on our Technical Advisory Committee, and we really worked back and forth, and a variety of different issues emerged along the way. I think one of the things that was really brought to my attention is it's not, you know, that it's not just about service, and it's just not about expanding service, but we have to be thinking about the facilities that we need to support these services, such as if we want new service on a road, what about the sidewalks on that road so pedestrians can walk and access that? And how do we get that? Or we have new service and we have these new connections from different transit agencies, but then how are our transit centers working? How does that work? So I think our transit development plan is unique from other potential transit master plans in that it really does focus on the needs, and it really is there to help not just Clackamas County itself, but our other transit providers to understand what those needs are and to better connect to different funding sources. And kind of full circle back to the HB 2017 transit funding money. You know, that's a wonderful new source of money, but there are other funding sources out there that I think that this transit development plan will be helpful in being able to identify, have these projects out there and the different organizations being able to work together to be able to really figure out how to make them happen. So with that, Susie and Krista and I can answer questions, and we can probably stop sharing the screen, Krista, and we can have a conversation. Let's see. Trent, I'm not quite sure here. It's been a while, so do you want me to just answer, call on people, or how do you do this?
I'll tell you, I'll just call on them and you can respond to the questions.
Right.
So I think first up I saw Martin Myers and then followed by Tom Markgraf.
Thank you, everyone. This has been a very nice presentation. I also very much appreciate the work that you've done here. I have first a brief line of questioning on the macro level. And then I have, after we're done with that, I'd like to talk specifically on the micro level, my own community, which is the Redland community. So I'm the CPO representative on C4. I think that basically is the rural and unincorporated areas. I consider my mandate here to try and protect those interests and try and get as much money to the rural and unincorporated areas as I can kind of act as a counter lever against the power of the cities, which are very much present on C4. And one of the things that I was struck with the 2017 state monies was how much of that went to the cities and how so very little of that went to the rural and unincorporated areas. C4 had a presentation a couple years ago when I was still an alternate. Marge Stewart and I sat in on it, and we both listened to the presentations that all the cities made in terms of the monies that they were using, how much they were receiving, and then what they were doing with it. We listened to the amounts that were stated, added them up, and carefully listened to see what money was being spent in the rural and unincorporated areas. Out of the approximately $39 million that came into the county, and that's my figuring just from listening to C4 presentations, less than 1%, 0.6 of 1% of the 2017 monies that came into the county were spent in rural and unincorporated areas. That was about a $240,000 project that Mike Besner presented at the very end of this. Considering that over almost half of the population of the county resides in the rural and unincorporated areas, to me, this was appalling. And so I've kind of made it something that I've wanted to follow up on. And I've sent 3 emails to the county, to you, Karen, and one to Ms. Gonzalez, wanting to bring the county to the forefront on this. And what I see from the maps is that you have done this. You have started to really bring in the rural and unincorporated areas. And I understand the difficulties with STIP money and how that has to be tied into where the money emanates, because it is an employee or employer tax. So, but I want to see as much money getting brought into the rural and unincorporated areas. One of the ways that I have presented a couple different times, a way to do this is the demand and response, which is how you call that, and what I think is a curb to curb. I think it's a great, tremendous program, and I just want to make the pitch that I've always made. I don't know how much it was heard here and how much it's reflected in the plan, but in one way that the county could try and rectify the disparate amount of money that's spent in the county versus what's spent in the cities is to emphasize and amp up that portal to portal or demand response allowance. So I'd like to know a little bit about that, how that plans to play out, not just in the rural areas, or excuse me, not just in the city areas, but specifically in the rural areas. And to that point, I kind of take it to my next step, which is the micro level, and that's the Redland. So on page 451, we talk about the Estacada Redland Oregon City connection. Now, as I said, I wrote 3 letters, and I was looking for Redland to participate in this process because I know that there is nowhere near agreement on whether or not a route through our community, our rural community, makes any sense. I've had repeatedly people tell me they're not interested in following an empty TriMet bus up Redland. It bothers me a little bit that I haven't had Redland brought into this discussion. I know that you may have reached out to other CPOs, but Redland hasn't gotten its say on this. I've only just introduced it to the CPOs anecdotally, but I know that there's some real controversy over it. And I'm worried because we weren't even contacted in the process that the focus is on Oregon City, on an Estacada, but it's not on Redland. It should pass through. So my 2 questions, one is macro, one is micro. Macro, do you think in this current and future plan, we're going to do better than 0.6 of 1% on getting money to the rural and unincorporated areas? And then on the micro issue, and I'm sorry to be so long-winded, how can Redland still participate in this and make a meaningful contribution to this one particular corridor? Okay, thank you, Karen.
So I have for the first question, and I believe there was quite a bit of detail in last month's packet about the actual STIF proposals for the STIF plan, the upcoming STIF plan. And it is my understanding that actually as a part of that is an increase in the Clackamas County portion to be able to look at demand response, to be able to increase for that. So I would say that yes, that is something that Clackamas County is looking at and looking at finding ways that we can use some of the STIF funds to pay for that. So I think folks are hearing. I do recall, and I don't have the list of our PAC members, but we did reach out to some folks in Redland to be able to participate in that. But I do want to highlight that, right now on the map is a line, right? There's a line. It's currently, a long-term recommendation, I believe. And it falls into the category, and Krista or Susie, I'll kind of lean on you on this one, but I think we have it listed as local service. And that local service really can be provided in different ways, depending on what's appropriate for the area. So I don't know, Krista, if you have more, you do a better job of kind of articulating the fact that actually as it gets nearer to identification of funding, you really think about how you do anyway, I'll let you talk, Krista.
Sure. And yes, we do have a PAC member who is from the Redland, Vale and Fishers Mill CPO. It's Bobby Bryan. So they've been involved throughout this process, and we did ask PAC and TAC to distribute that to their groups. So for that connection, we had recommended a deviated fixed route, meaning there would be zones in which probably a shuttle, a smaller vehicle, not the full 40-foot bus, a shuttle would be going, and someone needed to be picked up a little ways away from the route, then they could request that. But otherwise, it's not stopping on the middle of the highways. There's certain zones where we know people may not be served today, where we have that flexibility, but it has the reliability of the fixed route, as well as, again, not very frequent stops on the highways. So another community, we engaged the Beaver Creek Hamlet, and we're able to share that route with them as well. And that was another unincorporated area of the county that does have some pretty high density and didn't currently have transit service. So on the Oregon City end, we're looking at trying to serve them too.
Great. We have
Commissioner, if I may, just one follow-up. Communicating with the rural and unincorporated areas is best done through the CPOs. If you contact the CPOs, they can set up a meeting, they can notice the meeting, they can get it out to the community, they can hold that community meeting, and they can report back to you an official finding. Now, in the future, if you could consider using us, the CPOs, as a way to communicate with the rural and unincorporated areas on things like that, I think you'll find a more effective and a deeper and more meaningful response. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the response and the question. We've got, this is scheduled to go to 7:45, and we have just a little bit of time, but I'm thinking maybe we need to stretch it. I know that there's a lot of questions. We can't get to them all. I'm going to forego my questions for the good of the order here. So I'm going to jump to Tom Markgraf, and everyone can just condense the question so we can hear from as many people as possible. Thank you. So Tom.
I really appreciate the overview. I thought it was very comprehensive and terrific. And I appreciate Karen's comments about shelters and making sure they're accessible. We have found through the 50-year history of TriMet that there have been a lot of shelters that are not accessible, that they're on a highway, for example, with no sidewalk. And one of the goals that we have is to make all of our shelters now ADA accessible. So if you're looking at in our lines, new shelters and whatnot like that, we really need to have them safe and accessible for seniors and people with disabilities. That's really critical, because we want to be 100% ADA accessible on our entire system.
Okay, so that was a comment. Thank you. Is there a response from staff per se?
I think it was a comment. But I think we incorporated that into the transit development plan and that need, which I think is important, because then again, we can then hopefully connect those needs to funding into the future.
Okay. John Keith, you're up.
Thank you. So I represent the Stafford Hamlet, and I was curious about the Oregon City to I-5 route. And I noticed that we were not on the list of organizations that you contacted, since we're right in the middle there. So I would echo the comments from the Redlands CPO that we really need to be engaged, and I don't think we have been, and would really like to understand better how a route through Borland Road really serves the community, because unless it's a transfer of personnel from the Oregon City Transit Center to the Tualatin Transit Center, I'm not sure what the value of that route is, given the limited development out there. So again, I would echo the comment that we were not involved. We would like to be involved. And in the future, the CPO is the best way to be involved.
So thank you very much. And I know that we did do quite a bit of outreach, and I do think some of the outreach had been impacted. We've had a lot going on this year, right? And so there was that little fire thing that happened in September that we were working through in October as well. We had reached out to quite a few of the CPOs and were able to attend their meetings. But as you all know, that CPO meet at different times, and sometimes they meet quarterly, sometimes they don't meet as quite on a regular basis. So I don't think we were able to connect with every single CPO.
So
I do think though that we did connect with Rich Cook, and I'm not quite sure if he's from the Stafford CPO. He could be from the Stafford Hamlet, but I do believe that he attended one of our last transit development plan meetings, or one of the small group meetings that we had. So we have pushed that information out to the CPOs.
So, well, Rick is a private citizen. He's not part of the CPO or the Hamlet. The Stafford Hamlet is an engaging public body. The CPO is sort of regenerating itself. But maybe we can have you back at a different meeting, maybe in February, to talk about this, because there's a lot of community interest, a lot of community passion about this route. And it's not that we're against it. It's just that we don't understand why this is a priority for your effort.
Right. No, and we definitely can come out.
So who should I contact to schedule?
So I'll put my contact information in the chat. Does that sound good?
Okay, well, that's fine.
Yeah.
And maybe Trent can send that to me, because I may not get that.
Okay.
But,
yeah, Trent can send it to you.
Okay.
Absolutely happy to do that.
Thank you, Trent.
Okay, great. Next up, Mayor Axelrod.
Hi, first I just want to thank staff and all for this report. I'm really impressed with just the level of analysis and all the alternative considerations that were brought in. It's overwhelming document to look at. I wish I sort of put more time into being able to look at it more critically. And I'd love to follow up after, because I've got a lot of notes and ideas and things. But let me just kind of hit on a couple. In considering around the sort of the needs analysis up front, there was a discussion around needs analysis, and a couple of things that stuck out for me was there wasn't really a mention about the last mile, first mile issue in the needs analysis up front. And then it's very clear that as a directive, just sort of stepping into this, and this sort of gets to a macro level, that there's a great need for this rapid bus on transit on 205. And I guess one of my thoughts is we have so much demonstrated need and interest here, yet we don't have ODOT planning it at the moment. How do we get that, onto that their radar for the design work that we're hoping to implement earlier? That's another sort of component of that. Another key interest I have is a concern. I very much support the ideas about enhancing the corridors like 43, which we all know is needed. But if we don't address the safety issues there, I'm just worried about us creating some real, conflict. We already have it, you take your life in your hands just trying to cross the road in the early morning half the times. And the pedestrian and bicycle facilities along there are just, dangerous as heck. And you know, if we haven't addressed those, I'm not sure how we, you know, enhance them as we've envisioned, but maybe you've got a plan for that. And then there's some other details on Borland we could get in another time. I don't want to get into that, but maybe you could just touch base on those pieces. Sorry, I know it wasn't particularly focused, but
I think I got them all. So the needs identification that was in this particular memo is a summary of a previous and probably similarly large document that we had done. So that did consider how many people were within, you know, a quarter mile, a half mile, a mile of transit. So looking at that range of how far people have to walk to get to their bus stop. So it did factor into the analysis. We didn't bring all the details forward with it,
okay.
And certainly had heard that from the public throughout. On the,
Can I ask one quick follow-up on that? Also, because in my note was about parking. Was that consideration too if people are actually driving? You know, there was talk about the hubs where you might have some organized parking for people that want to drive to a little local hub. But if they're just trying to get through the neighborhood and they all want to park because there's a stop, you know, we have some sort of like I'm thinking of Rosemont route or some areas on Borland where more people might want to go to a bus stop, but where are they going to put their car? You know. I'd be interested if you guys had some considerations around that.
Yes, we made some high level comments about it. We hear that a lot on a lot of the rural highways too, of I don't want to drive all the way to the Mac station. Can I catch, you know, the Malala to Oregon City route? So there are some considerations there. We tend to get more into the details of it when we do more of an operations plan, like the one that was done for the Oregon City and Clackamas industrial area last mile shuttles. Just as we're getting closer to implementing those, we know more about where those needs are. So that places like mobility hubs we highlighted were some really key spots we thought there would be a high demand. But beyond that, we noted those, you know, longer highways was a big one that came up. We heard a few max stations that have parking rides that are full by 7 a.m. And comments like that. And then I know we're short on time. I'll hit on your other ones a little quick. The rapid bus on I-205, SMART is looking at bus on shoulder service. So it would be just as it sounds, a bus operating on shoulders to bypass some of that congestion, make for a faster trip and kind of a more appealing choice. I can sit in traffic or I can get on the bus over there. Let's see, supporting enhancing 43 and fixing safety. That again, one of the areas we heard safety concerns, and I believe Clackamas County is pursuing a pedestrian and bicycle safety plan next year. That could certainly look at those elements in more detail. And then you had mentioned Borland Road, but
No,
I don't
that's
know.
okay. I think you covered in that other. But one quick related to that. So there's a lot of discussion about the connection on the 205 corridor between Oregon City and I-5. But what are we really talking about in terms of connecting up? Is it going into Tualatin? Is it going into Wilsonville? Are we going to Beaverton? Is it going to Sherwood? I wasn't quite sure about, you know, what that connectivity piece was. And it just says to I-5. Well, what does that mean? Are you linking into something going up to Portland, or what is the vital connection there? I didn't quite catch that in the analysis about what that was supposed to be connecting up.
Yes, there's a few different things. So SMARTS is Wilsonville over to Clackamas Town Center with potentially 1 or 2 stops in Westland, Oregon City. They're working through that. There's a separate shuttle that would be from Oregon City to Tualatin, potentially with a Westland or Stafford stop. And that's in a planning process right now. And then Ride Connection is also looking at a Borland Road route out to between Stafford and Tualatin. So there's a few different services doing different things on that corridor.
Thank you.
Yep. One thing I do want to add to one of the points that Mayor Axelrod brought up, and that was regard, you know, what are we doing about it, so to speak. And this is a study, and I was actually pretty impressed by taking the survey, how much detail and how much coverage of the county they looked at and quizzed us on in the survey. But I will say for those who are following the I-205, I-5 tolling study and some of the other discussions and what just the buzz around the ODOT with the OTC and so forth, I will tell you that there's more emphasis probably on transit or trying to get dollars into transit than there's ever has been before. And I think they know that they need to do something because of diversion. I know that heavily impacts West Lynn, Stafford, you know, all the way into Wilsonville and so on, and Oregon City, and, you know, just a number of communities. So for another topic, and maybe sometime soon, probably from ODOT, or what we'll hear is we'll probably hear that there might be some mitigation out of this whole tolling thing that provides more money for transit particularly. So that's where I think the focus is going to be, Mayor, and the opportunity, frankly. So next up, we have Councilor Lewis.
Sure, thank you. I'll try and be quick. Thank you for the excellent work and good presentation. I echo a lot of the thoughts of my mayor. My question is, do you have an accompanying infrastructure list? So the corridors, you've talked about how many more runs you need, but short of another bus and a driver, what infrastructure is needed to make that possible, whether it's bus pull-offs, you know, for C2C, literally buying up some right away and putting more pavement on the ground. What are the infrastructure needs identified to make those things possible? And are they aligned on the same timelines, short, medium, and long?
So, Krista, do you want to take that, or?
Sure, I'm on a roll. That's a great question. Some of the things we thought about, the mobility hubs or existing transit centers, capacity at those can be really challenging. So those tend to be kind of bigger projects. The bus pullouts and waiting areas, when we think about future development, was something we considered in our land use plan. Bus stops and shelters, the need to provide comfortable places for people to work or wait is in there as well. Something the plan didn't get too into, but does mention, is the high capacity transit corridors that Metro and TriMet have identified. And the types of infrastructure for that, from the technology side, the signal side, is another need if you're looking to implement pretty quick service on busy corridors. But on the rural front, mostly the bus stops, as we're getting more into urban and dense areas, the transit centers and faster transit signal technologies tend to be the big infrastructure.
And I guess I would also add is that it did not go into the level of detail with respect to analyzing kind of all of the specific infrastructure needs for each of these levels of service. But it is kind of a step that allows us, I think, as Krista mentioned, for places like Clackamas County, we'll be updating our pedestrian and bikeway plans so we can be thinking about where future transit is as we think about our needs for our pedestrian system. So having these plans work together in concert. And I know that TriMet has recently completed a pedestrian plan that talks specifically about the needs from the kind of the pedestrian view for their transit system. So making sure that we're using each other's plans to inform the work that's done out there.
Great. I have a question. I think that is at least will maybe speak to some of the less populated areas, and a lot of that being rural. And that is, in the analysis, let's just say the city of Estacada, for example. The city of Estacada, much smaller population than the rest of the area. So the number of respondents will obviously be less than it would be, the city of Milwaukee, for example, with 24,000 people. So when we did when you did the analysis, did we look at the percentage of the sample area and actually put it on a same scale? Or did we actually just do by numbers and say we had respondents, we had 150 respondents from Milwaukee, but we only had 10 from Estacada? do we have a scale in that analysis so that we could put them on a level playing field that really touches on a level of, ultimately a level of service at some regard, if you go to satisfy or address some of those needs?
I can help respond to that if you'd like, Krista. So I'd say the survey responses were not really used as votes in prioritizing one area over another, but we were looking at, of people who chimed in on a certain area, you know, what are we hearing about that? So a little, and obviously we need to consider whether we got a lot of responses or a little responses and how much weight to put in to the feedback we got about the specifics about that route. But they were not used as a voting system as far as the short-term, midterm, and long-term prioritization process. That really came down more to kind of level of needs as we looked at kind of commute demand and population density, and kind of speaking of the rural areas, also thinking about those rural areas of density in the unincorporated areas and kind of comparing those densities in travel sheds to the amount of transit service that was there. That really, as well as kind of project readiness to some extent. And, you know, where is there kind of momentum as we're thinking about what was identified in Malala's transit plan and Estaqueta's, when I say Malala, South Clackamas's transit plan and Sandy's transit plan, you know, where there are some alignments in what they were hearing as far as what they heard from people who chimed in from Estaqueta and their plans. So we're really trying to take, you know, feedback from public outreach that was conducted as part of each of the transit agencies' more recent planning processes as well, in trying to identify what are the most pressing needs for the near term.
Okay. Just another minute. I'm just going to ask one more question. It may be a clarification actually for the audience, and that is that I know there's always confusion whether as you call it the last mile or you call it the first mile. And HB 2017 was initially designed to, you know, provide service really from really where the employee lives. And so one might think the first mile is where I live, and maybe the last mile is where my destination and so forth. And I know that's really not, I won't say correct, but that's really not how it's being used. My question is that, and concern, or maybe you can address this, is that there's also confusion about shuttles. So there's a shuttle that might go between the town center and maybe to a main line, versus a local circulator shuttle that goes, you know, through a community with topographical issues such as West Lynn, Lake Oswego, Oregon City, where there's a lot of topography. There's challenges for people getting to the main line. Could you just speak to that briefly?
So I'm gonna jump in just for a second, and then I'll let Krista and Susie answer. So one of the things that I really think about is the fact that there is service that's needed, but then how is that service provided? You know, what is the right type of vehicle for providing that service? So I think that connects to what you're saying, Commissioner Savas, in the sense of, are there topographical challenges that cause, you know, that for a need for a smaller bus then, or is it a smaller bus because of the amount of people? Those type of things would influence, and often those smaller buses are thought of as shuttles. So Susie, I don't know if you wanted to add something else.
Yeah, no, I can just build on that and just kind of, yeah, generally when we were looking at areas that are underserved or hard to serve within the TriMet service area, that was generally the service model that we were looking at, was these kind of community access and job access shuttles, kind of smaller buses that are kind of operating within TriMet service area, but not operated by TriMet. And as we looked at things that were more outside TriMet service area and not within any of the other service providers areas, I guess that's another kind of caveat to note, is that we really were not trying to do planning within SMART service area or within Estaqueta's or Sandy's service area or within South Clackamas's service area, but trying to identify what are the areas that aren't being served at all, and, you know, within all these rural providers, that they're each providing some of them are providing connections between services. And so we were trying to look at, are those sufficient? What more is needed in connecting the various services? And as we look at those rural service areas, in kind of what is the best service model, a lot of these rural providers are operating smaller buses. And as we looked at more enhanced service in more rural communities or more inner city service in the rural communities, as Krista was mentioning, a model that seems to really help some of those first mile, last mile issues is operating a deviated route, where it has a route and a schedule, but if somebody schedules it, the bus can go up to a designated amount of distance, quarter mile, half mile off the route to pick somebody up. So that's kind of one of the key strategies in first mile, last mile issues in the rural areas. Within the kind of more urban areas, that's kind of where some of these shuttles have also been identified as needed, or depending on how urban it is, you'd start looking more heavily at walking and biking and other micromobility options.
Okay, well, great. Well, thank you for taking another 10, 15 minutes of extra questions on our behalf. So thank you so much. We'll now move on to our legislative piece. And Trent, you want to take over?
I'm happy to do that. Before we get into that, I just want to give Karen a heads up. If you could please take a look in the chat, there's a little bit there about more on the CPO topic and trying to find ways to engage CPOs and hamlets in potentially the communication lines for the Transit Planning Committee. So just there's a few things there in the chat that I would just direct your attention to as we're moving into the next phase here. All right. Legislative issues. Normally, it would be counterpart Chris Lyons here, but he is on a much-deserved vacation as we get ready for the next legislative session and potentially a special session here in December, if that is to come into fruition. So if there is a special session, I'll just add it's more than likely 100% probably going to be about a response to COVID, the COVID freeze here in the state, with perhaps a little bit of chance it could touch on wildfire issues. It'll have nothing to do, I don't think, with anything else besides COVID and or wildfires. So as we're looking into the 21 session, C4 in the past has taken, created its own sort of soft agenda for issues that it as a group would like to advocate for. And in the past, it's been isolated to just I-205. And then there has been one additional issue that was 2 years ago. There was the Transportation Futures Study. And I have a memo, it's on page 110. It's probably the biggest packet we've had in a while of the C4 packet. And it talks about some of the criteria that we've recommended in the past for considering legislative issues for C4. Ideally, it's an issue that fits within C4's primary area of focus. That's been transportation or land use. And of course, housing is now in that umbrella. Asking, does the issue benefit all residents of Clackamas County, or is it isolated geographically? Is the issue Clackamas specific? In other words, if it weren't for the Clackamas community, would other people even know about this project or care about it as much? Is there C4 consensus and commitment among the members to actively work on the issue? And this has been a really key focus on what's helped this group narrow in on a couple of items. And then is there a realistic opportunity during the legislative session to advance the issue? So there's a little bit of criteria that I think has been helpful for C4 to just hone in on the responsibility for what you want to add to your legislative agendas. It's Chris and I sort of huddled up and thought collectively that we would agree that the I-205 project, the widening seismic improvements funding program, continues to be a top priority for Clackamas County, the communities of Clackamas County, everyone in this group in particular. This group has done so much work on its advancement, including just moving it along in the process, including it in House Bill 2017 a few years ago, keeping the torch lit, as it were, during funding efforts in the last couple of years, even prioritizing bus on shoulder communication for just transit needs along the corridor. So this group, and I think everybody in this group too, Chris and I both feel everyone in this group sees a benefit to a smooth running freeway that runs through Clackamas County that has benefits not just to those communities that are adjacent to the freeway, but even our rural communities see a benefit to it even the rural communities in the state of Oregon that are well outside of the Clackamas County have identified I-205 as a major piece of infrastructure that benefits the whole state. So at the same time, it's been a challenge outside of Clackamas County to find a lot of support because there are so many priorities, even in our region, that take up space. And so this group has been incredibly influential. I know I don't need to tell you all this. I've probably been going way too long on how much work y'all have done on it. So I would just encourage you to please continue to keep I-205 at the front of your list. Other issues like the Transportation Future Study, certainly worth reconsidering adding that to your list. However, it would be my recommendation that it will be a hard push this coming year, knowing that budgets will be tight. There's a lot of projects that'll be in the front for bonding. And even though what's probably a $2 to $2.5 million project that we would have been asking for 2 years ago and would ask for again, feels like small dollars in the grand scheme of the state's budget. It was a heavy enough lift 2 years ago when the budgets were good. It would be hard enough again to do it now. And we also struggled, I think, as a group to advocate to our legislators on support for it. So I would recommend maybe tabling that one and returning to that issue in a future retreat and honing in what it is we'd be after for a future study, for perhaps a future ask. That's our recommendation, but if it's this group's will to move forward in that direction, we can certainly talk more about it. So sort of with that, I would just put it back on the conversation back to the chair, Commissioner Savas, to facilitate a conversation about whether you'd like to move forward with keeping I-205 on the front of your list, or if you would like to convene at a later time to talk about legislative issues as more of the bills come out.
Okay, thank you, Trent. What's the pleasure of the group? Any comments, suggestions? The floor is yours. A shy bunch tonight. Mayor Knapp, how about any words of wisdom?
I think the last couple of years have demonstrated that collaboration is a significant factor in increased success for Clackamas County, and would encourage that we find a way to settle on agreement on priorities. It's regrettable but true that budgeting the coming year is going to make it tough to move things forward on a lot of fronts that we would otherwise like to do so. I think the 205 focus is important. You've got multiple other groups around the region looking at tolling and the effects of that. I think the freeways have a fairly high profile at this point, and we ought to we ought to take advantage of that probably and try to push things in the direction that would be as advantageous as we can for our county. And we might have an opportunity to do that. So it's a moving game. It's never static, and it's good that we have the county people looking at the activity and feeding back so we can kind of stay up with the game and what's going on, and hopefully that will give us some opportunities in the coming year, even in the tight budget scenario.
Great, thank you so much. Commissioner Smith, Oregon City.
Thank you. So obviously, you know, I-205 runs through our city, so I'm going to advocate for the I-205 project being front of mind and a priority for us. Most of you probably know I work for the state in my day job, and so I just wanted to make a couple of other comments. I think I've already seen one draft legislative concept about wildfire recovery. And so I think it's more of just a comment for Trent, that I know that there's going to be a few bills and you're probably aware of them already. But thinking about long-term wildfire recovery for Clackamas County and the rural areas that were impacted, just some areas to watch and that we may want to comment on and participate on to benefit rural Clackamas County. And then the second comment was The governor's recommended budget that was released on Tuesday kind of had some, the public version was very generic in some areas, but I am aware of some grant dollars that around a couple $1 million that's tucked into DLCD's recommended budget for rural transportation planning. And I have a feeling that it's likely going to be leaning toward Eastern Oregon, but I think there is an argument to be made or something for us to consider as to whether or not rural Clackamas County has transportation projects. And if you, I think it's easy for maybe rural areas of counties like Clackamas to be forgotten in the larger conversation. Clackamas just gets lumped with Portland in a lot of conversations, right? So there may be some conversations there to, make sure that that money doesn't get completely targeted to half of the state. If we have some clear projects that would benefit rural Clackamas County or make some linkages to economic development and the pieces of Clackamas County that we need more connection. So just a couple of things in the last week that have come across my desk that I thought I would share.
Thank you, Commissioner Smith. I appreciate the latter part, most especially about the rural areas and the potential of being, forgotten. So, and that's something that's near and dear to me. So thank you. We're trying to abbreviate the agenda because we spent an extra 15 minutes on the transit stuff, which is great. But we have one more comment from Mr. Myers. So Martin.
Thank you. I'll try and be brief. Ms. Lyle, I appreciate, I would have been entirely remiss without not bringing up right now rural recovery from wildfire and more important, just future resiliency. This is the number one thing that I'm hearing from anybody that I talk to in the county right now. CPO Summit last month spent almost its entire meeting talking about this problem. I was evacuated for 10 days. It was a panic. The communications were very bad. I don't have to go into it. I think that's really important. I will also agree with Mayor Knapp. The arterial that runs through the county is absolutely important, but I think that wildfire response and resiliency for the rural county should also be high on the priority list. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. So,
Paul, could I
Mayor,
just
add your hand, I see?
Yeah, could I just add real quickly to that too? Because I agree with all those comments, but let's also remember that the need for the support of the rural areas of Clackamas County around the fires, housing is a big part of it too. So it's not just transportation. There was a big discussion today around the housing needs. And I've been reading the FEMA reports and the FEMA response, which has been really great, but there's real needs there. And they're covering a lot of things, I know, but there's still going to be particularly some people coming late to the game that maybe aren't as organized, and they're going to need some support and help. And we need to remember those in real need in our county. So let's not forget them. I totally support that.
Okay, great. So Trent, do you have is that pretty well satisfy what you're looking for? Or?
Absolutely. I-205 sort of at the front of the list, along with wildfire recovery and resiliency. And thanks for bringing that up. I'll say that when Chris and I were initially in our huddle, the draft concepts for the wildfire recovery stuff had not yet started coming out yet, but you're right. Haven't seen them in the last couple of weeks. A lot of them deal with land use. Some of them deal with housing. Most of them deal with, sort of cleanup and debris management and future forest management. But there are things that certainly impact the right now, the needs that are right now and into the new year. So we can add that does affect, as we all know from this year, every part of Clackamas County. So I think we can all, as a group, agree on a lot of that.
Great, thank you. We are now at the point of the meeting where I get a little sentimental about our friends here. So Trent, how do you want to approach this?
Do it a number of ways. I'll start. I think it'll be hard to do a couple of pieces after it gets into the sentimental side of things, but let me just start with, at the very end of the packet, there is a memo to the cities, and I can send this to the city managers after the meeting, but it's a please feel welcome to share it with your councils and city managers as well. That talks about sort of the changeover. And so Commissioner Savas mentioned this earlier, that the change is happening. It is also the time of year in C4 where we ask all of our cities to reconsider their members and their alternates. And I can't stress enough the value of the alternates. It does help with changes, and elections are awesome, but they create a lot of change. In addition to a lot of you do a lot of other really important and responsible work, whether it's at your jobs or at your homes, and there's just a lot of turnover. So the alternate, I feel, is an important role as well for the cities. And many of you here started off as alternates for C4 and now are the primary member. So as you work with your cities to figure out who the member and alternate is for the next 2 years for C4, here's a memo to help guide some of your conversations. There's some FAQs in here. I will also pass this on to the city managers, which this memo does a decent job of noting the timelines. And as always, please feel welcome to reach out and ask me questions about it. Moving on from that, what I would like to do at a minimum is just mention the name of the folks who, because of the election, are moving on from C4, so that we have a good grasp on the impact it's having to C4. And so I'll sort of walk through this. Chair Bernard, who was part of Clackamas County long before I even arrived at Clackamas County. Mayor Axelrod and Councilor Terry Cummings from West Lynn, both the member and the alternate. Mayor Knapp, 12 years on C4, I think I heard from Mark. Councilor Morrison, moving on. Councilor Kohlhoff at Lake Oswego. Mayor Swigert from Malala, who's not here tonight. Jan Lee from Sandy, also not here tonight. Mayor Holliday, moving on. And this is the hardest one, I think, for me. That's so much change for her. Wilda Parks, who has been an alternate for us here at C4, who started off as, from what's my time with the county, citizen extraordinaire to mayor to councilor to C4 member, C4 alternate, C4 member again, C4 alternate again. Quite a lot there. So we'll miss each and every one of these names. And then, yeah, that's the whole set. So you can kind of see it's a big list of change that we're expecting here in the new year.
Yeah, thank you. Not often, even though there are elections every 2 years for councils and commissions, but we don't often necessarily see such a large change. And so this is significant. It kind of reminds me of 2012, 2013, when we had a change as well. We had a lot of new faces. And so, there's a displacement of folks, if you will. So I just want to recognize all the people that have been there. Mayor Knapp, you and I have worked together on C4 for a very long time in a number of different places, venues, people, commissioners, and so forth. I truly appreciate, your contribution. You've always studied the material. You've been right there with it. You bring up great points. And did a great job at JPAC as well, and did a great job representing the city. So I want to recognize you. Mayor Axelrod, you've done a fantastic job as mayor of West Lynn, representing West Lynn's interest, and your contribution here at C4, absolutely imperative. Councilor Kohlhoff, really appreciated you. We've had some great discussions. And I think that you said it best here just recently. I think may have been the C4 Metro Subcommittee, that, despite the different ideologies and despite our differences, we have worked together very well. And we did a lot of good work also on our C4 Metro Subcommittee. And that's another opportunity where a lot of us have gotten together. Of course, Commissioner Chair Bernard. Commissioner Chair Bernard and I go way back. And so I remember his father. We used to trade. I remember Jim most especially when he was the mayor. And I know his passion for the city of Milwaukee. I know his passion for the county. And Jim brings a lot of heart to the work he does. And of course, whenever you work with anyone, we always have our different opinions and so forth. And we've gone through that, but he's got great temperament. And I've really appreciated, his presence and understanding. So I know I missed someone. Who'd I miss?
I'll be leaving as well.
Paul. Mr. Morrison, thank you so much for bringing the whole shuttle between Tualatin, Stafford, Oregon City. That was, I mean, that was literally, that was so refreshing to hear that, number one, Tualatin was involved, and you brought something forward that I think is gonna be a great asset to that portion of the county. So I also appreciate your role and in your contribution as well. And we'll miss you. Absolutely. And anyone else want to make any comments or chide anyone? Jim.
Well, I want to thank all you guys for the great work you do. It's been an honor and a privilege working with you. And Ed Gronke's the guy I've known the longest. I think it was a McLaughlin plan that first time we ever worked together. Still working on McLaughlin. But Russ and Tim and Paul and Teresa, I mean, it's been a privilege. I'm gonna miss all you guys, but don't, oh, and Tom, you're not leaving though. I've got that beef, he's fattening up good. But anyway, Ed, particularly you, a man who's volunteered for so many things, has done such great things for the county. It's been an honor and a privilege. And Paul, we do have our disagreements, but we've done a lot for Clackamas County. The VRF, which we talked about that for over 20 years. It's going to help bring Clackamas County into the next century, hopefully. So thank you all very much. And I just want to take a minute and thank you. It's been, again, an honor. Thanks.
Mayor Knapp.
I certainly want to compliment the work that Chair Bernard has done in the years here recently, especially. It's been great to work with you, Jim. I do think that the county has made significant strides on a lot of fronts in the years that I've been able to be part of it. It's been gratifying to see the increased professionalism and skills and concerns that have been brought to the table. I hope that is something that will position the people that are stepping up to a little more responsibility to continue forward and make more progress. It is a never changing kind of a game that we're involved in as our counties and our cities grow, and the need for employment, the need for housing, the need for transportation, all those are something that just kind of seem just out of reach for us, no matter what we do, but we need to keep working on all of them. And, you know, I will continue to be a Clackamas County resident for a long time, and I'll be watching what goes on. Don't know exactly what I'm going to do other than get a little more playtime in. So it's a very interesting thing to be involved in. And I think that the government service has been one of the more interesting things in my life. And I hope others of you find that to be true also as you dig in and get a little more engaged. So thank you all for all the work that you do. And we'll look forward to things coming in the future.
Mayor Axelrod, any words?
Well, sure. You know, first, I just want to thank every one of you. I mean, I've learned from every one of you, and I look at you and the little times here and there and every meetings, and whether it's here or other meetings that we share, it's been a huge learning process for me. When I came into this role as mayor, one of my key objectives was stepping outside the city as much as the work we have, hard work we have in the city. And I think the work with the regional mayors and working with the county and the collaborative work and the professional level of support and respect that we've built over the last several years, I think it's really important that newcomers coming in, that we really press upon them the need and the emphasis to build on what we've really kind of enhanced, I think, significantly the last several years. I think without it, we're Clackamas County, just will be in a different place. So it'd be nice to keep the trajectory going. I'll still be around. I'd love to, contribute or engage where it might be helpful. But it's been great. And one of the things that's really impressed me and something I've learned as mayor, not only I've been impressed with our staff. Our staff in the city has been amazing, but just for the county in this role of C4, I've really been impressed with the staff we have at Clackamas County. It's, been top notch. We might have differences of where our focus might be here and there, but there's other budget realities and other things that are reflected. There's commission has its own, focus efforts and all. So I've enjoyed working with the commission. And it's kind of sad. It's kind of hard to leave. But it's been a great learning curve for me, and it's been big eye-opening, like Mayor Knapp says, for better understanding and appreciation for public service. Everyone should experience that at some level. Today, I had the opportunity to crown our queen of the Westland County Fair, our ambassadors today. We had a small ceremony down at Willamette Park, and I've gone to all of them, but it was my first opportunity to actually announce the queen, and for me, it was so cool because, I just got to share with the kids how important it is what they're doing, stepping into the community at an early age and engaging and caring about their community and getting involved. I didn't do that when I was their age. I was kind of a rebellious surfer, and I kind of regret that. But, sometimes it just takes a while to kind of come around and figure things out in life. And I'm one of those that kind of often has taken the hard path to get where I am, but I don't regret it at all. It's been wonderful along the way, and I've just really enjoyed working with everyone. And of the mayors here too, I especially want to thank Mayor Knapp for his leadership too. I've learned a lot from you, Tim, and I really wish you the best. Wish all of you the best. But thank you.
Councilor Morrison, the floor is yours. Thank you, Mayor.
I just want to thank everybody. I'm clearly a short timer compared to some of you, but I have learned in the last 2 years so much about working with all of you, and in particular with Chair Bernard and his respect for the small portion of Tualatin that is in Clackamas County, and the same for you, Commissioner Savas. Really appreciate the efforts all of you have done. And I also agree with the comment, we've had some disagreements, but I always was able to find something in common. In particular, I know there's been some disagreement between the 3 cities in Stafford, and yet we've worked, I think, really well together to try to be united on highway improvements. The Willamette Falls are the 2 that come to the top of my mind. So I'm going to miss everybody. I hope to be back. I have kids in high school, and it was one of the reasons why I chose not to run for re-election. This is really, really hard when you have kids in high school. I will tell you that right now. It's a really trying time, especially one's involved in choir, and they're obviously not singing. One's involved in track and field, and they're not allowed to run because apparently it's a non-contact sport. And I have a baseball player who has fortunately been able to play a lot of baseball, but it's been very interesting. So I had to take a time out, but I hope to be back down the road, because I really enjoyed what I was doing, both with Clackamas County and Washington County, and for the city of Tualatin, and to get to know all of you. And again, just a real fun environment, and great to work with everybody. Oh, and one other quick thing, I do want to pile on Mayor Knapp, I believe is the one who said it. The Clackamas County staff is truly amazing. And I mean, if we'd had time today for comments, I would have given a shout out to Karen. I was so, as I read that bus report in the packet, I just literally, I was so happy. I can't tell you how happy I was to see this all finally coming together, and all the hard work she's put in, Trent, all the work you've done. I mean, there's so many people who have done so much here in Clackamas County on the staff side, and they've all been tremendous to work with, and I can't thank them enough as well.
Thank you, Paul. Councillor Kolhoff.
So I probably did better with all of my committees outside of the city than I did in the city. You all seem to understand that the relationships that we formed would make it so much easier to get jobs done that are rarely the task only of your city. In other words, your concerns don't end at the boundary of the city. And so those of you who remain are going to be in a good position to educate the next group. You know, Jeff Goodman was here before, and for whatever reason, the only one following him was me. And I don't know who's going to follow after me, but that's going to be your task to get that message out that, you know, really we're all truly in this together. And that means the county, the C4 Metro was always amazing. And I personally adored all of the Metro committees that I was on. So yeah, I didn't feel like a unicorn with all of you. And yes, Commissioner Savas, you didn't, as even with my mayor, you didn't make me feel weird that I'm to the left and perhaps you're in the middle. So I will not necessarily be doing, I don't know what we're doing, but I'm married to Mike and we're going to cause trouble someplace else than at C4.
Yeah, well, thank you, Councillor. I do want to say that, and maybe a lot of you don't know this, but you did a great job in following or doing what Jeff Goodman did. I know Jeff Goodman's in the audience, but Jeff still attends a lot of JPAC and MPAC stuff, and he's still involved. And he's attending our meeting tonight. And Councillor Kolhoff, as the alternate, you attended a lot of those meetings. And I really appreciate the alternate staying so engaged. It's so important that when you are ready to take the seat, that, you know, when you have that opportunity, you know what's going on. You're not totally in the dark. And so that's valuable. And I really appreciate that. And all of you have helped set the bar for not only this organization, C4, but for the county. And I think it's all incumbent upon us to make sure that we carry that and we improve upon the work that and the foundation that you've all helped lay. So my gratitude to all of you. So one round of applause in a virtual way. Thank you so much. So I think that brings us to the end of the meeting almost. We have the JPAC update. I'm not sure there's anything there, Mayor Knapp. Anything you want to contribute?
No, I don't have anything to give to you. They sent me, said they were sending me my certificate, thanking me for JPAC. So I guess I'm out the door. Yeah.
Okay. MPAC. Anyone want to jump in on MPAC? I don't know who our rep is that's present tonight.
I think I am the one who was at the last meeting. Brett and I were both there. I feel like this meeting happened so long ago. I feel like we must have presented to you all about this already. It was in October, but perhaps we didn't. Trent is giving me a thumbs up that we did. Okay, so nothing to report.
Okay. I'll do the R1 Act, a brief update on the Tuesday was December 1st. The Oregon Transportation Commission met. We met as the R1 Act before that, the previous Monday, to help shape or advocate for a certain STIP model. We end up picking 3 of the models essentially, and we sent a letter off. The OTC met on Tuesday. We thought they would decide on the STIP, but what they have done, I guess they're going to come back next week, I think the 7th, if I'm not mistaken, and they've come up with 2 hybrid models of the funding allocations for STIP. So we'll have some more information, and it looks like they're putting a little bit more weight. I could be wrong, I'm just kind of going off of memory, a little bit more weight on maintenance. And they shrunk down the bucket on enhanced and put a lot in safety. And it looks more like a non-highway type of thing. I think safety is obviously a huge issue right now. But that's all I have on the R1 Act. And as I look to the agenda, is there any other business for the good of the order? Any other comments? Oh, Martin, I see your hand up. Did you have your hand up? Was that from before? Okay. Trent.
Hi, thanks. I mentioned it earlier that there's a lot of work going on with the supportive housing services measure that passed, and they're building the airplane right now, getting ready to fly it. There's a survey out right now, and I think it's going around to community members, and I just want to draw it to your attention. I will send it around in an email either tonight or tomorrow, Monday at the latest. So be on the lookout for that. That email will also include Karen's contact information for those of you who are going to reach back out, Martin, John, etc. So that'll be in the update email forthcoming.
Great. Anyone else? I want to wish you all a safe and happy holiday season and a happy new year. I'm going to have instead of having a New Year's Eve party, we're going to have probably more of a virtual farewell or good riddance 2020 party. And of course, welcome to 2021. So thank you all. And again, have a safe holiday season, and we'll see you next year. Thank you.
Bye,
Thank you, everyone. Happy holidays.
Take care of yourselves.
Be well, everybody. Wear your mask.